Morning, sunshines. So, welcome to America. Welcome to the third section of the class. Everything from now on is going to be in America. Yay. Before we start today, I haven't really checked my email yet, but my guess is there's still some of you who haven't yet returned your test. So again, all you have to do is hit reply, not reply all, because if you hit reply all, you'll send it to everybody and nobody doesn't need it. But just hit reply and then put your answers A, B, C, D, E to each of the multiple choice questions to the left of the number, and then write your short essays at the bottom. And again, there is an extra credit question at the very bottom, so don't make sure to scroll down all the way to get your extra credit question, because it's pretty easy, and I hope everybody's gonna get an extra point for that. Anyway, if you've already turned it in, great. As I grade them, I'm going to send them back to you so that you have a copy of your grade. But for those of you who haven't yet finished your test, please send it in. Yes, just hit reply, give me your answers, and finish the test. Cool. All right, now let's talk about America. The play for today is Death of a Salesman. If you happen to be on the group or in the group that's supposed to be presented today, if you just take your materials, whatever it is that you're going to tell us or explain to us or show us, just send that in to a reply email to me. If it's whatever the research is, just put it together and send it to me, and I'll make sure that it gets disseminated to everybody else in the class. But because I'm not sure what it is that you might or would have said, we'll talk a little bit about Death of a Salesman for everyone. First of all, Death of a Salesman is a new style of tragedy. It is a tragedy, but as opposed to tragedy in the traditional sense, where tragedy happened to people who are higher in society than the normal person, Willie Loman, as his last name suggests, is a low man. He's not necessarily destitute. He's been working, he has a job, he's paid for a house, which puts him, I would say, in the middle class. But you have the tragedy of a common man in America, which comes about in the 20th century. Tragedies can now be about people like you and me. No longer are they melodramas, but tragedies can relate more personally to people on the middle scale of the income scale. So that's one of the important things that's happened here. Arthur Miller is the playwright for the play. We'll talk about him a little bit. But he certainly wasn't the first to write in this style. Eugene O'Neill sort of created that style, but he certainly followed along in that style, as did many American playwrights, and that was sort of their major influence on changing the way that tragedies appeared. Before we get too deep into the play itself, we're going to talk a little bit about different ways of interpreting the show. We've talked a lot about isms, we talked about realism, talked about naturalism, talked about expressionism, impressionism, surrealism, all those sort of things. So today I'm going to try and give you, as best I can, some specific examples of different ways of interpreting Death of a Salesman, hopefully to expand and explain a little bit about each of these isms, and you can see practical examples of what's going on here. But before we get there, let me just talk about what the role of the set designer is. Obviously, we've got the director now who's in charge of taking the play from the page to the stage, of interpreting the play. And the set designer is the person who figures out what physically is going to be on the stage. And again, clues are taken from the script. So for instance, in the script, there is a refrigerator that he's supposed to get the whipped cheese out of. And so you have to sort of deal with that. How is that going to happen? Is it a period refrigerator? Is it a block of wood that just pretends to be a refrigerator? Are they miming the cheese? Whatever the answer is, the set designer, in collaboration with the director and the costume designer and the lighting designer, come up with the answers as to how you're going to find the way you're going to interpret the particular play. Yes? Now, let's talk about the play specifically. In Death of a Salesman, there certainly are scenes that I would say are realism. The very first scene in the play, when Willie has come back and he's almost driven off the road, and he's sort of upset and talking to his wife Linda on the side of the bed, I would say that's in real time, and it really happened, and it was a real conversation. Now, there are things in the play, though, that aren't necessarily things that happen in the real world. As a matter of fact, there's a complete character, Ben, his older brother, who only appears in Willie's head. Nobody else in the play can see Ben. All those scenes that Ben are in all happen in Willie's mind. There's the scene where he's playing cards with his next door neighbor, Charlie, and in the course of the scene, they really are in real life playing cards at the dining room table. And suddenly Ben appears in Willie's head, and Charlie can't see Ben, but Willie is having a conversation with Ben about how he left him and how he made the wrong choice and he should have gone off with him and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, Willie has a dementia about him, and Willie is living, and we talked about how reality is inside your mind as opposed to this external world, and that points to the fact that even though there are realistic aspects of Death of a Salesman, ultimately Death of a Salesman is at least expressionistic, if not surrealistic. Yes. Now I'm going to show you a couple of sketches for a few sets. The first one is actually, I'm going to show you is more impressionistic, which I would say doesn't go quite far enough, but that's just me as a personal choice. But the first sketch is pretty much everything is in realistic time. Now, there's still, the walls are represented by the framework of the walls. There's cornice or the top of the wall, there's baseboard at the bottom of the wall, but the walls themselves aren't filled in, so you can see into bedrooms, you can see upstairs, you can see that obviously the kitchen is a large expanse, but the piece itself doesn't alter those things. Everything is on that set as it would be in reality if the reality was there. The second sketch I'm going to show you is a version of the play that we did here at AUM maybe 10 years ago. And it does have realistic aspects. There's a refrigerator there in the kitchen where he gets the cheese. There's the double beds or the single beds upstairs where the boys' room is. You've got the antenna on top of the roof, that sort of stuff. But on the sides, you have the buildings that are sort of encroaching on the middle. There's a line in the play very early on where Willie is talking about how when they first moved here years ago, there wasn't anything around. And since then, the city has crept up on them, and all you can see now are windows and bricks and windows, which is the easiest definition of a building there is. And again, there's no period detail to the windows and bricks. It literally is, as Willie described it, these bricks and windows that are encroaching on him or somehow keeping him inside, caging him in, basically. I'm going to say that's an expressionistic, even though it has impressionistic and it has realistic aspects. Mostly it's an expressionistic set. Yes? Now the last one we're going to look at is, as you can see, even weirder. There are no walls at all in this one. As a matter of fact, there's no furniture in this one. There's just poles and frames. Again, I'm going to say this is more of a surrealistic version of the play. Obviously, there are some things up there that I can recognize. The car looks like a car to me. I'm sure they took the motor out of it. I'm sure they didn't hang a 2,000-pound car up there, but I'm sure they hung the frame of a car up there. The house is a house. There's a little moon with a little branch in front of it. Anyway, there are certain aspects of the play that are idealized up there. I'm going to say the frames of the set indicate sort of snapshots of our life. The play is just a series of snapshots, photos, like you would hang on your wall, showing you your past history, where you've been, parties you've been to, all that sort of thing. Of course, nowadays we take so many selfies and all that sort of stuff. We don't treasure them as they used to be treasured in the past. But back in the day, when you only had 36 shots on a roll of film, you had to plan your photos a little bit more, and you valued them a little bit more once you got them back from the store, because they were a little bit harder to come by. But I'm going to say that's what that points to. Now you can look at the floor of the drawing there, and you can see, I'm going to say this, the part to the drawing's left, the stage right part, for those of you who remember that. The line between the light and the dark is a little bit harder, and I'm going to say that indicates that the lighting is trying to put Linda inside the house. And then to the stage left part of the stage, or to the right of the drawing, you see the line, the difference between the dark and the light part is sort of fuzzier, and it looks to me like Willie is standing outside because he's in a light that's a little less refined. So I'm going to say, again, the lighting designer is working hand in hand with the set designer to help sculpt the environment and give you as an audience the sense of where they are. But again, it's the same play in all three examples. You still got to have Biff and Happy getting mad at their dad and leaving them at the steak place and all the things that happen, and him having an affair with a woman. But again, it's just the different ways you interpret the play can create different looks, different environments for the play to happen. The actors still have to say the same lines, they're still on stage. The play is still the same, but the way, the style of the performance is very different, yes? Again, I've given you a link there to the mid-90s version starring Dustin Hoffman of the video of the show. That's the entire show. So if you haven't had a chance to read it, you can just watch the video there, and it is very close to. I mean, they alter a few things, but that's no more than a standard deviation in a performance would alter it. But I would say it's a very realistic, or very sticks to the play very easily and very good. But I would recommend it to you if you haven't had a chance to read it already. Cool. All right. Before we move on to the people we're going to talk about, we need to talk about a couple things, some awards, because we've talked about Nobel Prizes a couple times last semester, or last we spoke. And Nobel Prizes were invented by or created by this man named Alfred Nobel, who invented dynamite in the end of the 19th century. And he made a lot of money because, again, dynamite became a very popular thing during the First World War. And so at the end of his life, he felt pretty bad that his invention, which his dad had worked in a coal mine, and what he was trying to do was create something that would make coal mining very easily. And dynamite, TNT, does a really good job of blowing up rocks and making a coal miner's job very easy. The problem, of course, is it can blow up a lot of other things as well, and therefore can be used in war. And so he felt very bad that he had profited off the death of so many. So at the end of his life, he created this prize, and every year in Stockholm, Switzerland, they award Nobel Prizes in a variety of categories. Now, the thing about a Nobel Prize, one of the categories is literature, and you don't necessarily have to give a Nobel Prize in literature in any particular year if the Nobel Prize Committee doesn't feel there's anyone or anything that they deem worthy. It's $1 million prize. You get to go to Stockholm, Sweden, and collect your prize and make a speech and do all that sort of stuff, and everybody dresses up. Typically, there are prizes in literature and chemistry and physics. There's a Nobel Peace Prize for advancements in making peace throughout the universe, or the world at least. So there are a variety of categories, but that's an international award. We're going to talk a lot about the Pulitzer Prizes today. Pulitzer Prizes were created by this man, Joseph Pulitzer, who invented yellow journalism in the latter half of the 19th century. He started the New York Post. Yellow journalism is sensational journalism. It's the Inquirer. It doesn't necessarily mean it's false, it's just sensationalized. It's the boogeyman, it's the aliens, it's anything along those lines that is sensational. For instance, there was one year Mel Gibson went to America to film this film after Mad Max. I can't think exactly what it was. Anyway, when he got back to Australia, the newspaper reporter asked him if he was gay, and he said, well, no. And so the next day the headline said, Mel Gibson denies being gay. Well, it is true that the question was asked and he answered it, and he did deny it, but it had nothing to do with anything. There were no rumors about him being gay. It was just a sensational headline to sell newspapers, yes. So that's yellow journalism, and again, one of the reasons it's called yellow journalism, it used to be printed on very cheap yellow paper. But Joseph Pulitzer made a lot of money doing this type of journalism, and at the end of his career, instead of, well, the other thing is he didn't like his sons too much, so he left all of his money to this Pulitzer Prize Committee. And again, as with the Nobel Prize, they don't have to award a Pulitzer Prize in any given year they don't feel that something has risen to the value of a Pulitzer Prize. But it can be given in a variety of areas. Typically it has to do with newsprint journalism, but also in broadcast journalism. But also there's an award for drama and literature as a Pulitzer Prize. Again, they give it for photography. I don't know if you remember the picture of the fireman raising the flag at 9/11, but that won a Pulitzer Prize for photography. The guys raising the flag at Iwo Jima won a Pulitzer Prize that year. Anyway, so there's a variety of fields, a variety of areas where in different years, different people can win a Pulitzer Prize, but you don't necessarily have to. Of the 100 years of the Pulitzer Prize, there have been a good 15, 20 years where no Pulitzer Prize in theater was awarded. So it is more often than not, there is someone who is given a Pulitzer Prize, but it doesn't have to happen in case Pulitzer Prize isn't deemed worthy. The other type of award that we're going to talk about today is the Tony Award. The Antoinette Perry Award is the Tony Award. It is the award that's given every year to the best play, the best musical, the best performance on Broadway. We're going to talk about Broadway next class period, but Broadway is basically a street in New York City. And there are 46 theaters currently on Broadway, and those theaters every year can compete from May to May for the Tony Award for that year's Tonys. Again, it is given annually, and there are some years when there are several good plays. For instance, the year that Wicked went up. Wicked is one of my all-time favorite musicals. There happened to be a musical called Avenue Q, which was a musical about puppets, and 2003, and the musical about puppets, Avenue Q, won Best Musical, even though I'm going to tell you Wicked is one of the 10 best musicals ever written. The year that it went up for a Tony Award, it didn't win. But there are also years where there really aren't anything that I would say is going to be lasting, but it's just the best musical of that year, and it was. But the award is given annually, whether or not anything is certainly Tony Award worthy. And there are certainly things that have been award worthy that didn't get the Tony. We'll talk about some of those things during the course of the class today and the rest of the semester. But those are the major type of awards that are given annually and can be given to playwrights as well as to actors, directors, and all that sort of stuff that we'll talk about during the course of the class period for the rest of the semester. Just make sure you understand the difference between the three of them. Before we get into some playwrights, there's a couple people we're going to talk about who certainly had began to bring the field of realism into America from others. We talked about our good friend Konstantin Stanislavski developing the method in Russia last class period. Lee Strasberg opens a school in New York and starts training people in the method in America. And so a lot of actors flocked to Lee Strasberg School. He also originated or started the Actors Studio. What's the name of the guy that just died?
James Lipton.
James Lipton just passed away, has been running it for the past 30, 40 years. But Lee Strasberg started it. I've given you a little video clip of Strasberg in Godfather. He played Hyman Roth in the Godfather 2 specifically. But he was a well-known actor. He also was a director. But he certainly brought the ideas and manifested the ideas of the method acting school in America and changed a lot of actors' ways of performances. I would say the biggest director along those lines in the early American theater was a man named Elia Kazan. Elia worked a lot with Tennessee Williams, who we'll talk about in a little bit here. But Elia Kazan was always stretching the limits of the art. A lot of directors during this time period would fall back into realism and use that as their form, but Elia Kazan was always trying to stretch the ways that plays were being done, and so he was the one who was at the forefront of the avant-garde of the theater, doing expressionistic plays, doing impressionistic plays, doing realistic plays, and so he was out there pushing the envelope, whereas a lot of directors were falling back onto the realistic interpretation that plays fell into during that time period. Probably the first internationally successful American in theatrical terms is a man named Robert Edmond Jones. He was a set designer, but he wrote a book called The Dramatic Imagination, in which he talked about the use of expressionistic and impressionistic styles to make plays, he argued, better. He said that when a set designer made choices, it cemented in the audience's mind what the furniture looked like, what the walls looked like, what the wallpaper looked like, what the windowsills were, because the set designer was making all those choices. His argument in The Dramatic Imagination was that we all, as an audience, have this thing that he called the eye of the mind. It's our imagination. And that if you just give a few basic details, like for instance the cornice and the floorboard that we talked about when we talked about the impressionistic design of Death of a Salesman, if you just give a couple of examples on the set, the audience will then fill in from their experience the color of the wallpaper, the type of windowsill, all the answers that need to be on the stage. The audience then is an active participant in the choices, and because they have helped select and in their mind can see those choices, Robert Edmond Jones says that those type of plays have a deeper impact because you have more closely gotten into their dream state, have gotten into their superego, as we talked about when we talked about Freud last time. Yes, and so he said that the two keys to this, what he calls new stagecraft, are simplification. In other words, try not to put too much detail on stage, and suggestion. Merely by having a piece of cornice on the stage, you can suggest a wall. Merely by having a window hanging on the stage, you can suggest a wall with a window in it. And so simplification and suggestion become the core ideas behind this new stagecraft, this new way of doing this impressionistic, expressionist theater. And again, Kazan is certainly working along those lines, but Robert Edmond Jones is the first one to codify, to put it into book form so that people outside of America can understand. And because it's in the book and you can buy it internationally, he becomes the first artist in American terms to become internationally well known. Now, in 1916, he got together with this man named Eugene O'Neill, and they opened in Provincetown, Rhode Island, this theater called the Provincetown Players. Now, first of all, Robert Edmond Jones lived from 1887 to 1954. Eugene O'Neill was a year younger. He lived from 1888 to 1953, born a year later, died a year earlier. But Eugene O'Neill was the son of the actor James O'Neill, and James O'Neill was the person in America. He was an actor on Broadway. He created the role of the Count of Monte Cristo. He also did D'Artagnan and a lot of the Three Musketeer plays that were on Broadway, the Dumas plays that made it to Broadway. And so he was a very successful actor. And even though Robert Edmond Jones was born Catholic, when he was born, he had a brother who was 6 years older than he was. And at his birth, his mother had complications from the birth, and his mother had to have a hysterectomy. Now, guys, I know you have no idea what I just said, but ladies, you know. What that means is that her womb was taken away from her at his birth, and so she could not have any more children, which upset her. Being a Catholic, she wanted to have lots of children. But the second thing is that in order to ease her pain during this time period, she was given morphine as her sedative, and unfortunately, morphine being the addictive kind of drug it is, she got addicted to morphine for the rest of her life. Now, I'm not going to come right out and say that she hated Eugene O'Neill, but she certainly had complicated feelings for her son. Every time she looked at him, she saw the death of the rest of her babies, all the rest of her life. And so there wasn't, and of course, being addicted to morphine, you're often not you're in La La Land anyway. And so you're unable to hide your emotional state. And so for the most part, Eugene O'Neill wound up, because his father was absent and working in New York City. And when his brother was 16, when he was 10, his brother left home. And so Eugene O'Neill is left at home caring for this morphine addicted mother who has, again, I hate to call it hatred, but she has mixed feelings about him as a son. Of course, they had servants, of course, because they were a very well-to-do family. His dad being a Broadway actor, very well paid. They certainly had some money, and they lived on the beach, which was not a horrible existence. But one of the things that he started to do in order to escape this mania that he found as his life was write plays. In his life, he wrote 24 plays. They're all tragedies except for one. He wrote one comedy, All Wilderness, and I would say All Wilderness is not a laughing comedy. It is just a comedy in the sense that nobody dies. It is a loving look at the teenage years of having a boy and a girl going down to the beach and falling in love and all that sort of stuff, having complications with the war coming on, having to join the army and all that mess, and then getting into the army, and of course finding that there are women out there who will take money for things. But it is a comedy that, again, not necessarily a laughing Neil Simon kind of comedy, but more of just a gentle look at the world. The rest of Eugene O'Neill's plays are very intense. The characters are all old and surly, and they're all sailors and tough and rugged people who have fights at the drop of a hat. One of the things about our good friend Eugene O'Neill is he won a total of 4 Pulitzer Prizes. Now, I'm going to tell you the list of plays that he won prizes for. My guess is, well, maybe one of them you've heard of. But he won his first Pulitzer Prize in 1920 was for Beyond the Horizon. Then he won a Pulitzer for Anna Christie, for Strange Interlude, and his last one was for Long Day's Journey into Night, which you'll notice was a posthumous award. And then in 1936, he also won the Nobel Prize for Literature. He's the first American to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. The other thing about Eugene O'Neill plays is that they are lengthy. One of his plays, The Iceman Cometh, is a 6-hour play. And Hickey, the main character in the play, doesn't appear for the first 2 hours. The Iceman Cometh is very much like Cheers, the television show. It all happens in a bar, and Hickey is like Norm. And so everybody's sitting around talking about how depressing the world is and how they hate the world and all this sort of stuff. And everybody keeps saying, well, when Hickey gets here, life's going to improve. And I can't wait for Hickey. And of course, as he walks in, just as when Norm walks into Cheers, everybody yells Norm. Hickey enlivens the place, and he is the life of the party. And at the end of the day, you find out, well, I'm not going to ruin the play for you, but you find out some things about Hickey which are not too exciting. The other thing is Sophia Loren is a famous actress from Italy. And her first movie in America was a movie called Desire Under the Elm, which is based on one of Neil Simon's plays. I've included a little link here for you to see a little bit of what that play is sort of like. You can see that one tends to be a little bit more melodramatic. It's about an older man who's in love with this younger woman, and they have a ranch hand who falls in love with her, and they have a fight, and ultimately the old man kills the young ranch hand.
Nobel Prize winner, 4 times awarded the Pulitzer Prize. Driven by his obsession for truth, he flooded the theater with the naked power and passion of honest human emotion. Magnificent, exciting Sophia Loren as Anna, the most shocking woman in the annals of great drama.
This is my farm. This is my home. Inside is my kitchen. I put out these blankets and I sleep on them by myself in the night. And upstairs is my bedroom.
Yes, the bed she shared with the ruthless old man, her husband, played by Burl Ives in an Academy Award-worthy performance. But in the next room, the young man waited. Tony Perkins as headstrong, passionate Eben.
I hate the sight of you.
If you hate me, why did you kiss me back? Why were your lips burning?
Get out of here before I kill you.
Thrown together by a desire as relentless as the passing seasons. Summer, when youth reaches hungrily for youth. Autumn, when an old man kicks up his heels and hurls defiance at time.
I'd invite you to dance at my 100th birthday, but you'll all be dead by then.
The snows of winter, smothering everything but the fires of hatred and jealousy.
I don't like pretending that what's mine is his. I've been doing that all my life.
The wildness of spring, when love swells into a frenzy that could drive them to murder.
He's back.
Morning Becomes Electra, again, is an 8-hour play that follows the path of the Greek drama Electra. But his plays are very intelligent, they're very stoic. The people, again, are savage to one another. They don't connect to one another. Every person's in their own little world. And again, you get a sense that a lot of this comes from his isolation as a child, where he has no connection to his family, nor to his parents, or to the world. He's constantly trying to get away. He's constantly trying to find a way to find passage to South America on a boat, that sort of thing. He loves the ocean, he loves the sea, and so those images are constantly throughout his plays. But he and Robert Edmond Jones found ways of staging these plays where you could use, instead of having to have the entire bar, all you had to have was just the main bar and some bar stools, and suddenly you had the environment. And when you shifted scenes, if you went outside, went onto a boat, you just had a pillar for a bar for the dock. You had some ropes on a post, and that symbolized the dock. And then when you got on the ship, you just have a handrail for the ship, that sort of thing. And so you were able to shift scenes backwards and forwards from place to place very easily. They were simplistic. They suggested where the environment you were on. But again, you're working on a minimal budget, and then once these plays became known, they transferred to Broadway and started winning Tony Awards and being nominated for other awards as well. I'm sorry, I think I may have misspoke. He wrote 31 full-length plays, and he won two Tony Awards. Now the thing about the Tony Awards didn't come around until 1947, and so really only the last 6 years of his life did the Tony Awards exist. And so the fact that he only won 2, I would say, should not. The plays were certainly Tony worthy, although the award didn't exist before that period of time. Cool. All right, going from the ridiculous to the sublime. Our good friend Eugene O'Neill was very serious and very hurt as an author. Thornton Wilder is the exact opposite. Thornton Wilder is playful, he's fun, he's energetic, he's a positive, he's an optimist as opposed to Eugene O'Neill being a pessimist. Now, Eugene O'Neill is not as pessimistic as Strasberg by any means. But he certainly is on that scale. Thornton Wilder is the exact opposite end. Thornton Wilder lived from 1897 to 1975. And Thornton Wilder was the best at combining innovation, creating new ways of approaching the theater, but also having it be very palatable. The audience accepted it. His first play along those lines was a play called Our Town. We may show a little bit of a clip from Our Town. But Our Town basically is the story of a young boy and young girl falling in love in Vermont during the early 1910s, 1920s. And as opposed to having a full set on stage, for instance, they would have a couple of ladders, and the boy and the girl would be at the top of the ladders, and you would get the sense that they were talking to each other across the driveway. And that's when they fall in love. They would have, in the second act, for instance, Emily, not to ruin the play for you, but Emily passes away in childbirth. And so the second act, there's a whole bunch of chairs on stage, and some people are sitting in some of them, they're all dressed in white. And then there's a whole bunch of people on the other side of the stage holding umbrellas, and they're all dressed in black. And you get the sense that, obviously if they've got umbrellas, it's raining, but you get the sense that Emily at some point comes in and sits in one of the chairs, and she recognizes her grandmother who passed away several years ago. She recognizes an aunt who passed away. There's an old man there, her grandfather, who she had never met or didn't remember, but he's sitting in his chair. And you get the sense that the chairs are the graves of the people, and they're all dressed in white, and they're all the ghosts. And then the people who are on the stage who are having the funeral are not being, you can't understand them, you can't hear them. You can see them making gestures and holding Bibles and doing things, but you can't actually hear what the living people are saying. And then one of the things, there's a stage manager who sort of is the narrator to the play, and he suggests to Emily that she can go back and relive one of her days in her life. And so the third act is her going back for her 16th birthday and reliving it because it was a very good day in her memory. But as she goes back to the day, she realizes that her father had been out on a business trip and was late getting home and had forgotten to buy her a birthday present. And so her mother gets very upset with her dad and goes out and buys a birthday present before Emily wakes up. And so there's a lot of fighting that she was unaware of in the family. And because she knows that in 2 years she's going to die in childbirth, she's just like, listen, can't we just all get along? So if we love each other, I don't even remember what my birthday present was when I was 16. But of course, there's the immediate trauma of the day that gets in the way. And so Thornton Wilder's plays are very, like I said, innovative in the sense that ladders become houses, chairs become gravestones, all that sort of stuff, which is very expressionistic, yes? But the story is very familiar. It's about a woman who is in love with her family and who's died in childbirth. All things that are very relatable and gets an audience to feel and care for that person, that character. One of the things, he also won 3 Pulitzer Prizes. One of them was for a novel called The Bridge over San Luis Rey. and I know you guys have nothing to do this weekend. So since you're stuck at home, if you want to read Bridge of San Luis Rey, I'll ruin it for you. Bridge of San Luis Rey is about this priest. There's a bridge, San Luis Rey River, and it collapses and 6 people are killed. And so because to his knowledge, none of those people deserve to die, the priest starts going around and finding out who each of those people were and how they were connected and why God chose to take them. And so he goes around, and there's a young daughter and a mother who are of course connected of the 6. But the other people had no relation to each other. They all have good things about them, all have bad things about them. Anyway, at the point of his return, he's struck by a car and killed himself. So again, I shouldn't laugh. But it's an incredibly moving book. If you have nothing to read this weekend, I would suggest that. His 2 Pulitzer Prizes, one was for a play called The Matchmaker, which later on is going to be turned into Hello Dolly, the musical Hello Dolly. And his other one was for Skin of Our Teeth. Now, Skin of Our Teeth is the world's first post-apocalyptic play. Now, what the hell did I just say? The apocalypse is the end of the world. It was written in 1934, and while there certainly had been plays about the end of the world before this, Skin of Our Teeth, the 3rd act of Skin of Our Teeth, happens after the end of the world, post-apocalyptic. Yes, and so the fact that we as a person of the people might be able to survive an apocalypse had not occurred to anyone to write about that before. And again, this is 10 years before the invention of the atom bomb. So once the atom bomb is invented, sure, people think about the end of the world and think about how to survive it. And so you come up with a lot of those type of plays in the 50s and 60s. But he's writing in the 30s about the apocalypse. Just to give you an example of the Skin of Our Teeth, Skin of Our Teeth happens in 3 acts. The first act is prehistoric. You have a family, the Antrobuses, the father, the mother, the daughter, the son, and a maid. And they are doing, think the Flintstones. They have dinosaurs as pets. They're doing their best to survive in a prehistoric world, that sort of thing. The second act happens in modern times. The father is running for president of the United States, and he's out campaigning and all that sort of stuff. And the son is becoming alienated. And the third act happens after the apocalypse, and the son has blown up the world trying to get back at his father, who has cheated on his mother with the maid. And so the whole third act happens after the apocalypse, and the story is really about the endurance of family. Doesn't matter whether you're prehistoric, whether you're today, or whether you're post-apocalyptic. According to Wilder and according to Skin of Our Teeth, the strongest bond in nature is that of our family. And those are the people that we need to care for and nurture. And my guess is, now that you're in some sort of coronavirus hell, your family are the people you've linked to most closely. So I would say you're very much living the Skin of Our Teeth right now from Thornton Wilder. Again, we talked a little bit about Death of a Salesman, so we'll talk a little bit more about Arthur Miller. Arthur Miller was born in 1915, died in 2005. He wrote a total of 36 plays. He also wrote 14 radio plays and 8 movies. He's really the first major playwright to venture into Hollywood. Bertolt Brecht had come to America after the Second World War and had sort of started the trend of playwrights moving into film. But Arthur Miller certainly picked up the gauntlet. His 2 Pulitzer Prizes, one for Death of a Salesman, which you've already talked about, and the second was for a play called The Crucible. Now, The Crucible is about a real story, happens in Salem, Massachusetts, back in the 17th century, where 19 women are hung and 1 man was pressed to death on the word of a bunch of 14-year-old girls. Again, I don't know the history of Salem necessarily, but I assume from the play that he had done a lot of research. It turns out that the 14-year-old girl was just had an affair with a 30-year-old man in the village, and that she was just the first person that she says was a witch, happened to be the wife of the 30-year-old man that she had the affair with. So once people started investigating these children, you find out they had ulterior motives, but because initially they were, pristine and pure little 14-year-old little girls, certainly they couldn't be, have any ulterior motives. The community rallied around them witch baiting, and again, I don't know if you've ever heard of a catch-22. But a catch-22 is, well, it comes from a novel called Catch-22, where there are 21 reasons you can't be insane or can't be kicked out of the Army, and the 22nd reason is because if you're insane, you know you'll get kicked out of the Army, therefore you must be sane. But Catch-22 is, for instance, to be proven that you're not a witch. Witches were supposedly made of wood. And so they would throw you into the water, into the river, and if you rose and didn't sink, then you were a witch. But if you didn't rise, if you laid at the bottom of the ocean or the river, then you were not a witch. The problem is, in order to stay down below the water, of course, you have to drown. So basically, that's the catch-22. If you rise to the surface, you'll be burned as a witch or hung as a witch, and if you don't, then you're proving you're not a witch, but you're also just as dead. Anyway, the play is an allegory for what's going on in Washington during this time period. It's called the Red Scare. There was this theory at the end of the Second World War. People became very convinced that instead of invading America militarily, because the Russians or Soviets couldn't defeat us militarily, they were very afraid that they would infiltrate our politics and get, so there was this thing called the Red Scare, and this committee in 1948 was formed called the House on Un-American Activities Committee. It's called HUAC, and it was headed by the junior senator from Kansas, Joseph McCarthy. Now, one of the things about the committee, well, one thing about, we talked about different things about politics, we talked about things about economics last test period. One of the things about the 1930s, there was this thing called the Great Depression. And there were a lot of people who questioned the validity of the capitalist system. Again, I'm not saying they were communists, but they certainly started exploring, looking at socialism as an alternative. And it was during this House on Un-American Activities Committee search that they started equating socialist activities with communist activities. And again, the communists were the Soviets. And so if you had attended a socialist rally in the 20s and 30s, they would pull you before the House on Un-American Activities Committee and threaten to put you in jail unless you gave them names of other co-conspirators. And so it wound up being where someone would be called in, let's say they called me in and said, hey, we're gonna put you in jail unless you tell us who you went to these meetings with. And so of course I'm gonna say I went to meetings with Cody and Cheyenne, and they would bring them before the House on Intelligence Committee, and they would let me go, and they would say, all right, you give me names. And of course, the names you give them aren't names of people you may have gone to the actual event with. They were enemies. They were the people you wanted to put in prison. And so ultimately this thing, absolute power corrupts absolutely, if you haven't heard that phrase. Because McCarthy really didn't have any balances to his committee, he's able to bully people, to push people around. And so Arthur Miller is among the first to point this out using the allegory of the Salem witch trials. Again, the Crucible was written in 1953, which is about 5 years after the committee began. But by 53, there you could already see that they were abusing their power, and it isn't until 56 that the committee is ultimately disbanded. Now, other plays he wrote, All My Sons in 47, View from the Bridge in 55. The American Clock was nominated for a Tony Award in 1980. He won a total of 9 Tony Awards for Best Play of his 36 plays that he wrote. The thing that I'm going to say you're probably most interested in about Arthur Miller, but probably is the least interesting thing about him as far as being a playwright, is that in 1961 he was the last husband of our good friend Marilyn Monroe. And technically, because she had never signed the divorce papers when she died, they still are married. Because until the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, you're not fully divorced. But she was divorced in all the ways from him. But he wrote, of his 8 movies, the last movie he wrote was called The Misfits, and it was the last movie for both Marilyn Monroe and Clark Gable, two iconic actors in the American history.
I just met me a girl sweet enough to eat, fine-looking woman.
How'd he do?
I have an empty house out in the country just beyond Hawleyville. It's all yours if you want some peace and quiet before you go back.
Gee, goes on forever.
Is There's no better place to be. You couldn't find better company either. You're a real beautiful woman.
You think you could break away from this paradise long enough to do a little Mustanging?
Horses?
We'd have to pick up another man.
Well, better than wages, ain't it?
Well, anything's better than wages.
It's like a dream.
But we'll never see this again in history, you know.
You kill him?
Contact! 1, 2, 3, over the gate!
He was well known both as a playwright and as a movie playwright, scene writer. It was what do you call it? Screenwriter. That sounds good. All right. Last guy. Yay. Tennessee Williams. Tennessee Williams was born in, guess it, where do you think he was born?
Tennessee.
Mississippi.
Oh.
Tennessee was born in Mississippi. However, he went to Harvard, and he had a very thick Southern drawl. And his name was Thomas William, and so it was a very boring name. So when he got there, they started teasing him and calling him Tennessee, and he thought that was much better than Thomas. So he went with it. He was born in 1911, died in 1984. I'm going to say that any prejudice that people may have for you, being from the South, probably come from some sort of version of what Tennessee Williams wrote. Tennessee Williams plays are iconically Southern. They tell, there's not a lot of Southern playwrights. We're going to talk about Marcia Norman coming up the next class period. But there's a lot of plays are set in the Northeast. A lot of plays are happening, at various locales in major cities and that sort of thing. But the South really is underrepresented in the terms of number of playwrights that are presented, especially early in the 20th century. So a lot of the preconditions that people have with the South come from Tennessee Williams plays. He won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, one for Streetcar Named Desire, and one for a play called Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Now I've included a link in your notes to Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. For those of you who are looking for extra credit, I would encourage you, it's a very good play. Go ahead and watch it. And you can write me a little paper or review of it for your extra credit. It also may be one of the options, instead of writing a paper on the Theater AUM play that may or may not still happen. It may be an option for that. Anyway, he was his first play that brought him to fame was a play called Glass Menagerie in 1944. Glass Menagerie is a story of Tom, a character that's leaving his sister who has pleurosis under the care of his mother and an absent father, and it is a memory play, and he is left just as Tennessee Williams in his life had left an ailing sister when he went off to college in his youth. Tom leaves this girl, Laura, to care for her Glass Menagerie, and she has a unicorn in the Glass Menagerie that is special because it has a horn. And at one point during the play, the horn is broken off, and she says, well, now it's no longer special, just like the rest of the animals. And so the thing about Laura, even though she has had this disease, she is like the unicorn. She's very, very precious, very delicate, like the glass figurines, that sort of thing. And it's a very loving memory play about his sister and about the South. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof is a play about a woman who is trying to seduce her husband, who was a former football player, to have a child because Big Daddy is about to die, and she wants him to leave them all his money in the will. And the problem is her younger brother, Gooper, has all these redneck children that he's got that will continue the legacy if they're not able to have a child. But Brick, the son, the husband, won't sleep with her because he thinks that she's had an affair with his best friend who has shot himself. Anyway, you can tell from the names, Gooper, Big Daddy, Big Mama, those are the type of Southern idioms that come around in his plays. Streetcar Named Desire takes place in New Orleans. If you've ever seen the scene, and we might be able to put this on there, of Stanley Kowalski yelling for Stella, it comes from this play. It is very, the characters are very lower class. They're very sexual. They're with the heat of New Orleans. They are constantly dressed in nothing but their undershirts and things like that. There is the main character, Blanche Dubois. It comes from aristocracy, but she has no money now. And so she is constantly having to beg for money, even though she carries herself as better than the rest. And at one point, she is raped by her brother-in-law. But the sister stands by her husband because she knows that he is the only hope that she has for survival in this world. But that's lost. I mean, that's Streetcar Named Desire.
Hey, Stella!
You put that howling down there and go to bed.
Yours, I want my clothes down here.
You shut up. You're gonna get the law on
Hey,
you.
Stella!
You can't beat on a woman and then call her back because she ain't gonna come. You're gonna have a baby.
Listen,
I hope they haul you in and turn a file on you like they done the last time.
down here.
You stinker.
Hey, Stella! Hey, Stella!
I wouldn't mix in this.
Don't ever leave me, baby.
The Summer Smoke, Night of the Iguana. One of the things about Tennessee Williams, his plays, again, all tend to have happen in the South. They all tend to happen in very hot, passionate environments. The thing about Tennessee Williams, much like Oscar Wilde, Tennessee Williams happened to be a homosexual. Now, as opposed to Oscar Wilde, who grew up in the Victorian age where he had to be imprisoned in the 1950s, really nobody else knew anybody else who was homosexual. So he was one of the first people to come out as a homosexual. And a lot of people, when they read his plays, knowing that he was a homosexual, try and attribute homosexual actions to the characters in his plays. I'm gonna say that's probably a wrong way to interpret Tennessee Williams. He certainly was gay, but he wrote women's characters, and they were fantastic women's characters. And because he wasn't a woman doesn't mean they weren't the things that women would do. I think he wrote very strong men characters because he knew men's characters like that. Again, there will be others who will argue with me, but I'm just telling you, I'm teaching the class, so my version is that Tennessee Williams doesn't necessarily have gay characters in his play, although there are those who will tell you that. Now, the four playwrights we've discussed, Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, Eugene O'Neill, and Thornton Wilder, I'm going to call them the cornerstones of American theater. Those four playwrights build the foundation for the house that is going to become American theater. And again, beginning of the 20th century is when these playwrights start taking their form. And one of the things that happens in the 20th century between the 1900 between 2000 is that American theater becomes the dominant force in theater throughout the world. We'll continue that path when we talk next time. Have a good weekend. Thanks.